Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 8 of the Hammer Territory podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Wednesday here in mid-May, and I am joined by technically the first ever guest. Doesn't look like a guest in some ways. Kris Willis is here. Hello, Kris. How are you?
Hey, Brad. How are you?
I'm living the dream. If people may not know this that are new listeners, Kris is what's your official title? Managing editor? You're something at
Yeah,
Battery
managing
Power.
editor, producer, do a little bit of everything. You know how that goes.
Kris runs SB Nation's Battery Power, where we all used to podcast, and Kris was a regular host on that show. He still does Battery Power TV with Grant McCauley and is, again, running the entire ship over there at Battery Power. So when I say he's a guest, he's technically a guest, but not really. Anyway, welcome, Kris. And of course, we should say at the top of the podcast, we are part of the Foul Territory Network, and we definitely encourage you to subscribe to this podcast and also Foul Territory anywhere you might find your podcast. That includes Apple and Spotify and Overcast, all those fun places. And we should also plug, we actually had a show on this same feed last night on Tuesday, from Stephen Tolbert and Sean Coleman. That was a fun conversation, as always, so don't forget to check that one out as well. But Kris, we're coming to you, it's deep into the night here on a Wednesday. In typical Braves podcast fashion, they had a really good week until we had to podcast about it. At least I had to podcast about it. I guess we should start the group chat again about how I'm the curse. But a 7-1 loss on this Wednesday evening. And quite frankly, as we'll get into more in a second, it was one of those games, I don't know if you have this feeling too, but how many of these are there per season where you just nothing goes well and it's kind of just over before it starts, and it's one of those games that over 162 it feels like they just have to happen, but it's not any fun when they actually do.
That first inning was rough. Morton wasn't sharp, had some bad luck in that inning. And you kind of felt like, okay, it's 3-0. If the Braves come in, score a couple of runs here, you might be able to make this game a shootout. But, it just didn't happen. And Cubs kept adding on. And then, by about the fifth inning, you could pretty much tell, where we were headed. So, yeah, not too fun. But, it happens. It's a long season.
It certainly does. And, there's that old adage, and of course, people use different numbers, but there's that split that people talk about there's X amount of games that you just are dead, and there's X amount of games that you're definitely going to win, and the rest of the games are where the season flips. It used to be 54, 54, 54 was one of the old adages. Sometimes it's maybe 40, 40, 80, however you want to put that. There's a certain amount of games every season where even the best teams are just kind of dead on arrival, and that was tonight, basically. So anyway, we'll touch on that in a second, as we always would. I just want to say this out loud because I know, having followed you on Twitter and also experiencing the comments, I'm sure, at Battery Power and talking to you offline, you have the same mentions I do about people that are kind of melting down about the Braves every once in a while. And they're 26-14 despite the loss this evening. That is a 105 win pace. They've won six of the last 8 games. It hasn't always been what we would have maybe thought, especially offensively. They finally kind of broke it open a little bit on Tuesday with 7 runs, and then they come back and score 1 run tonight. But Kris, just broadly, since I haven't talked to you on a podcast in a while, how are you feeling? Are you worried about this team at all? This is very broad on purpose, but what is the vibe? I know you always, just for people that don't know this, Kris also goes to the ballpark and sits in the press box and goes to the clubhouse and all those things. What's the vibe for you and around the team right now?
Well, for me, it has felt a little strange, I had this a week or so ago. It kind of felt like they were doing it a little bit with mirrors. They weren't hitting. The pitching was outstanding. They were scoring just enough runs to win. But, at the same time, you didn't really feel good about it because, they're not hitting the ball hard. You're not, they're not, when they did, they weren't getting anything to show for it. But, since that West Coast trip, they've come back. They've played a whole lot better baseball. You're starting to see guys come around. And, they're right back where right pretty close to where they were at this point last year. They're just doing it in different ways. Last year they were just out slugging everybody. And now, they've got dominant pitching, which I'm not sure anybody was really expecting, especially after Spencer Strider went down and Max Fried got off to that tough start. But, the way Fried's pitched lately, and then you look at Reynaldo Lopez and Chris Sale and Charlie Morton, he wasn't great today, but he had been pitching really well too. So, when you look at all of that, I think you got to feel good about it. Still feel good about this team because you know how talented they are offensively, and you got to think it's going to come around. But the vibe down there in that clubhouse and around them, this is just a confident group. They're not worried. They don't get shook. I guess the only time I ever really felt like they were shook was in the division series last year. They looked at that way a little bit, but this team does an excellent job of just managing the day to day. They take one game at a time. And I think that's one of Brian Snicker's best traits. If they have a stinker, they do a good job putting it behind them, focus on the task at hand, and move forward. And I mean, I think that's for the regular season, that's kind of the way you have to approach it, because you just, you go crazy, if you were just constantly worried about every little setback, over a 6-month season.
Yeah, I think we're aligned there. And, I tend to lean on large samples, and I tend to lean on overall talent level and try to ignore the ups and downs. It's sometimes hard, of course, when you're covering baseball. Like sometimes stuff groups in a negative way. But this offense, we've said it before on this network, but we'll say it again now, and you just kind of alluded to it. They're just kind of too good for me to worry about the offense in a broad way. Certainly, if we get into July and it's still like this, it's like, all right, what's going on here? And in a small sample size, like the playoffs, like you said, when they seemingly got a little bit shook last year, yeah, the small sample size of the playoffs is a different game in general, but I just can't really imagine a scenario where I would be terribly worried about this offense given the talent level, unless you get multiple injuries. Like, for instance, tonight, it's one game, but they were playing without Ronald and Austin Riley, and that obviously is not the same lineup in a one game sample size when you throw in, Murphy's already out, all those things. But taking a half step or a full step back, it's just too good of a unit offensively in particular with too long of a track record for me to be terribly worried. And again, the results, even if I love the way you put that about it being kind of like smoke and mirrors, because you're right. And we'll get into it in a second, but tonight was the first time, as we're of course again on Wednesday, May 15th, the first time in feels like a month plus that one of the big four starting pitchers actually had a bad night. Like the only time anyone's blown up recently was Bryce Elder in LA. And before that, it was like 4 weeks ago. It's been forever since they actually had a bad start, which is not sustainable. And last night, by the way, Steven on the show was basically like, by the way, guys, the starting pitching is going to regress. And he's right. It's not like a fun thing to think about, but like no one is as good as the Braves have been pitching wise for the last month.
Yeah, and I mean, I looked at the numbers today. I think it was back to April 19th. The Braves have the best ERA in the majors. It's like 2.2 something. That's coming into tonight. Obviously, that went back up tonight, but their FIP was about a run higher. So you knew they was going to regress a little bit. But just to clarify what I was talking about with smoke and mirrors, heading into that West Coast trip, I was not very confident. I was looking at the Dodgers playing the way they were. You're going to Seattle. You're not hitting the ball. You're going to have to face that pitching staff. I don't think I really thought they'd go 1-5, and they lost. What was it? Three 1-run games on that trip or something? Yep. Something crazy. I mean, they could have come back conceivably with a much better record, but it kind of felt that way. But you got to credit this team, because when they come back from that West Coast trip, they flush it. They have an off day. They take care of business at home against the Red Sox. They go to New York, have a chance to sweep there, come back home, have a chance to sweep the Cubs, and you're right back on track, winning 6 out of 8.
So I want to pivot to the actual series the last few days when it comes to the Cubs. Again, I know some of this was covered by Sean and Steven as far as Monday and Tuesday's games, but they were both shutout victories. I mean, you don't often see back-to-back shutout wins. That's a lot of fun. It speaks to how good, again, the pitching has been in recent days. All of the scoring on Monday happened in one half inning with 2 outs. It was 0-0. It was back-to-back doubles by Travis d'Arnaud and the legend himself, Zach Short, who has endeared himself to Braves fans already. And then Acuña knocks in short, and it's 2-0, and that was the entire scoring of the night on Monday. Ronaldo Lopez was fantastic once again. He did lead after 5 innings, and I know you were among all of us that were wondering why he came out after 5, but it was, I guess, alluded to be back tightness that is not terribly concerning. I guess until he pitches again, you have a little bit of fear about that. But other than that, Monday was really breezy. Even Ray Kerr was awesome on Monday night. We'll talk about him again in a second when it comes to tonight's game in 3 innings tonight. And they also went back to AJ Minter, because it feels like it was a long time ago now. But that blown save on Sunday, Snit did not hesitate at all going back to him on Monday, which I thought was pretty encouraging, and overall a pretty breezy win, even if not for an offensive explosion.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, the Minner thing was funny. I mean, I think I tweeted, I think Snicker's trolling everybody right now, after the reaction Sunday night. But, I wasn't surprised at all. I mean, how many times over the last few years, you and I've seen it, we saw Will Smith struggle. They sent him right back out there. We saw a stretch where Kenley Jansen struggled, sent him right back out there. We've seen Iglesias struggle. Snicker sends him right back out there. He's going to show confidence in those guys, and he's got a ton of confidence in AJ Minner. So I wasn't terribly surprised. A little surprised we didn't see Iglesias there, but I
Yeah.
kind of understand the rationale of what he was doing. We keep trying to get him back out there as quick as he could. To try to erase that. And I was a little worried. I think it was a single walk to start that in, or a walk single to start that in, and then gets the big double play, of course, and they get out of it. But yeah, I mean, again, they're doing a lot of the little things that they need to do right now, and you're starting to see the offense at least come around a little bit, which is which is what we've got to see. Matt Olson's starting to hit the ball a little bit better, and I hope that Acuña's going to come around here at some point too.
Yeah, speaking of the offense being a little bit better, Tuesday's game ends up being a 7-0 victory. The big story was Chris Sale, but I'll come back to that in a second. They did score 6 runs in the fourth inning, Michael Harris home run, and then the biggest swing was Matt Olson, who you just referenced, putting the hammer down with 3-run homer to go from a 4-run lead to a 7-run lead and basically end the game in the fourth. It's always nice to have a nice, breezy, comfortable win where you can kind of pull off the bullpen reins a little bit. You go Jackson Stevens at the end, not to worry about that too much. But look, we buried the lead maybe a little bit. Chris Sale has just been completely absurd so far. I know our mutual friend and my co-host Scott Coleman was calling a shot a little bit on Chris Sale. We were all pretty high on Chris Sale as far as he's always been good when he has been healthy, basically ever. But he has been so ridiculous. Another 7 shutout innings with 9 strikeouts and no walks. He's basically been the best pitcher in baseball the last 3 or 4 weeks. He has a 0.72 ERA in his last 4 starts. And that is obviously ludicrous. But I mean, I don't know about you, Chris. It feels like I don't think he'd win Cy Young right now because Imanaga has like a 0 ERA. But Chris Sale would be a top 5 Cy Young guy in the National League right now. And yes, it's May 15th. I'm not trying to get crazy here, but he has been basically fantastic. And even the underlying metrics look the part of a guy who is pitching that well.
He's been amazing. And I mean, I remember you and Scott saying, on the pod right after the trade happened, that look, when this guy's been healthy, he's pitched good. The problem's been he just hasn't been healthy. And, I know I got a little bit encouraged, in his first time he spoke to the media where he said, look, guys, I haven't been healthy. I haven't had a healthy, normal off season, since like 2018. Or something, it was something close to that. And when you hear a pitcher say that, I mean, he was already throwing bullpens and stuff and getting ready. And, you know what kind of competitor this guy is. But I'll be honest, though, I expected him to come in 5-6 innings. I expect him to be really conservative with him. Man, he's looked like vintage Chris Sale. He's pitching into the 7th. He's throwing 100 pitches. And, every time he goes out there, it's in the back of my mind that I just hope he can stay healthy, because you see how good he could be, how much of an impact he could have in October. But again, the more I watch him, the more that's kind of leaving my mind a little bit, just because, man, he just looks so good. He just looks so fluid. Nothing's bothering him, and and I think he's energized too, being with this Braves club that he knows has a chance to win big.
It feels that way. He's always been renowned as like he's a really competitive guy, really fiery guy that, there's always the debate about how much that stuff matters, but I think that it's a good thing to have in your clubhouse somewhere. Mid twos ERA with 61 strikeouts and 8 walks. I'm not making that up. 61 strikeouts and 8 walks so far. His FIP, his xFIP, all that stuff's in the mid twos. Like the ERA is pretty real. The Statcast data is looking great. He never walks anybody. It's just a scary situation where he's pitching this well, and everybody's knocking on wood. We all understand what the deal is there with regard to the health of Chris Sale, but he has been fantastic to this point. We should at least get into Wednesday's game briefly. I'll start here. The lineup was weakened, as I mentioned once earlier, but no Riley for the 3rd straight game. 'What do you make of the Riley situation right now? Because he's not on the IL. There's no reports of him being cleared. But, he's been They've been saying the right things. He had the soreness that became whatever it was, tightness, all that stuff. And it's been like every day you're looking at the lineup. Is it going to be back in there? Today, it didn't shock me too much because they had the off day tomorrow. But, anytime one of your stars misses 3 games in a row with an injury that, I guess it's good that he's not on the IL yet, but it's a little bit concerning if nothing else.
Yeah, I kind of thought. I think what is it? After today, they could backdate the IL stint for for 3 days. So,
Yeah.
he didn't go on there. I kind of thought, maybe he'll be back Friday. I know they talked to Brian Snicker during the game today, and he said, he could still feel it. Made me at least doubt maybe that he plays Friday now, or, at least a little more to have a little more doubt. But I think, with the MRI coming back clean, just showing a little inflammation, I don't think they think it's serious. But I can also see why they're going to play it really, really safe because, I mean, nobody thought Sean Murphy's was that serious either, and I mean we still haven't seen him since opening day. So, you definitely don't want to lose Riley for a month, 2 months like that. So, if they have to give him a little more time, they can. But I'll be surprised if he's not back, by Friday or Saturday.
It feels that way. And again, I don't want to make too much of the process stuff, but the fact that he didn't go on the IL pretty quickly is usually, not always, but usually a good sign. Murphy was immediately going to the IL. Like there was no, no hesitation there. It was just like, and obviously we didn't know how long he was going to be out at that point in time, but they've at least thought that Riley was close enough to where they didn't want to burn 2 weeks on him. So we'll see there, but that's obviously a huge loss. Even with as good as Short has been getting on base, you need Austin Riley, who's, again, a star level player. Elsewhere in that lineup today, or not in that lineup today, I should say, Ronald Acuña had the day off. I know they announced the lineup, and we were all like, all right, is he hurt or is it the day off? And Snit was pretty unequivocal. It's just a day off, kind of a reset for Ronald. What do you think of what's going on with Ronald so far? Obviously, it's a curve that you're grading on because he is the reigning MVP and one of the best players, if not the best player in baseball. And he's actually still on like a 4.5 win pace this year. He's still playing like a really, really good player. But I think we can all agree he hasn't been the same guy. So maybe just a little bit of a reset day. The underlying stuff looks okay, but Snit was like, just take a day off here. And also, again, it becomes 2 days off, which I think is a good strategic time to do that. But we all joked about it, Kris. They don't really give guys days off of their main guys. So it was a little bit noteworthy that it happened today.
Yeah, it usually things have to get really, really bad before somebody gets a day off. And, so I thought it was notable. I think it's worth noting and everything. And I mean, we talked about this last year. Ronald didn't have a bad month last year. I mean, Ronald had absurd months the whole season. I mean, go back and look at his weighted runs created plus by month. And I mean, they're ridiculous. So, I mean, baseball's a cruel game. It tends to come back and get you at some point. And I mean, I don't think people realize just how historical the season he had last year was. I mean, you and I talked coming into the season. I mean, there were people thinking he was going to top all that. And I was like, he may not ever see that. He may not ever see another season like that in his career. I mean, that's just the truth. I mean, when you look at everything that he did last year, but, I think when I look at him now, I think losing the time in spring training probably hurt. He insists he's healthy. He's been asked multiple times how the knee is and everything, because I think a lot of people look at these numbers and they see 2022 and they kind of wonder, is he sore, whatever. But what I'm no hitting that spurt. And, but I think I wrote this on the side a week or so ago. If you look, I mean, he's just pulling everything, and when he was going good last year, he's hitting the ball straight away center field, hitting into the opposite field. And I just think, right now he's trying to hit everything out to left right now. I mean, he's trying to hit 5 home runs in one at bat. And I think maybe a day off's what he needs, because he'll just maybe to allow him just time to, to reset, take a breath and get back out there and go. And I mean, he started to look, like what you saw. I mean, that home run he hit in New York the other day, that looks like what we're used to seeing from him. But, it's been a crazy week for him. I mean, getting picked off, getting picked off three straight
times in a row.
You're on a base. I felt a little bit better about that because Ozzy got picked off later, and Amanga had a pretty good move, But I mean, you just can't have stuff like that happening, and and credit to him for standing in the locker room and saying, that just can't happen, and because I'm not sure we would have heard that a few years ago from him, if that had happened. So, but I mean, I think he's hitting the ball on the ground. It's a lot of the same things we saw last year. He's just, I think if there's anything I'm concerned about is that he's just not hitting the ball as hard. And I don't think there was any chance that strikeout rate was always going to be the hardest thing for him to duplicate last year
Yep.
because, so I expected it to go up, but I think it's a little higher than what I was expecting. And again, I just feel like that's just him, trying to go out there and make something happen when, he's just got to get back within himself and let his natural talent take over.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because the strikeout rate is back up. It's not to a terrible degree or anything like that, but last year, that was the craziest thing about last year, you could argue. Even in the season where he stole 73 bases, the fact that he struck out like 11% of the time was just remarkable. And between that and the walk rate's still up, which is good. You like to see that. The power's way down, like you mentioned. The batted ball stuff is still, it looks okay, but last year he was otherworldly with batted ball data, and this year not as much. So it's still a tiny sample. It's a quarter of a season. You don't want to overreact because speaking of guys who have long records of being awesome, Ronald Acuña has long records of being awesome, but it's just something to keep an eye on because, to give him the day off today and we'll see how he looks. But if I have to guess whether he's going to be himself again pretty soon or not, I would probably lean that direction again, provided that he is healthy. And like you said, he's been asked a million times about that. I do want to at least bring up Charlie Morton. I know I'm the Charlie Morton guy. He was not good today. We talked about that earlier briefly, but it was just kind of one of those games for Charlie. He wasn't good. He wasn't sharp, and also was a little bit unlucky early in the game. I felt like, and I'm not just saying that because I'm trying to defend Charlie like I always would, but the Cubs batted around in the first inning, 4 hits, a walk, and a hit batsman. He did settle in a little bit after that, but then in the third inning gives him another run on a pickoff error that he actually was charged with. So, what did you make of his outing? And also, they pulled him up to 3 innings, which I thought was not shocking, but also interesting just because his pitch count was in the 70s. Like, it wasn't like he was going to go 7, but I wonder if that was because they have the day off tomorrow. They can afford to go deep into the bullpen. And also, Charlie Morton is 40. I'm not sure if you heard this, Kris, but Charlie Morton's 40.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't sharp, and I
No.
think he'd be the first one to say that. I haven't listened to him after the game. I'm sure that's one of the first things he said. But I thought there was some bad luck in that inning too. I mean, ball hits him in the foot and goes for a double into right field. The guy was thrown out. Arcia drops the ball. Just a couple of infield singles. But I mean, got to credit the Cubs because they fouled a ton of pitches off, and it just felt like Charlie just couldn't put anybody away tonight. He'd get in position 0-2, 1-2, and just couldn't get the strikeout, or get the weak contact, or the weak contact found a hole a lot of times. So yeah, I mean, he was fighting an uphill battle from early on. I thought it was interesting that they took him out when they did. I thought they might send him back out there for one more inning, which it might have been. Honestly, it might have been 1 inning too long if they had.
Yeah.
But the bullpen's kind of rested too. There's a good. I know we're going to talk about this, but there's a good chance they're going to get a reliever back Friday. So they may have, with the off day tomorrow, they may have felt they could have blowed somebody out tonight. And went on with it and just saved Charlie and get him ready for the next turn.
It did feel like it was a bit of prudence, which I'm okay with. We've made fun of the age before, but the fact that it's May 15th, he's pitched very well so far. Even with tonight, just to put it out there, Charlie's ERA is still 3.52 for the season. His xFIP and FIP are in that mid to high 3 range. Like, he still had a very solid season so far, even with tonight's bad start. But no reason to push him at all. It's probably good to be careful. Again, off day on Thursday. They had Ray Kerr around. That's probably a good bridge to talk about Pierce Johnson, who you just teased a little bit. But Ray Kerr threw 3 innings tonight. Seems to be that, not always, but oftentimes when you see that, that might be a signal that he is the guy that might go to the minors when Pierce Johnson comes back. That would not shock anyone, I don't think. Did you have the same thought? Because it felt like it was kind of telegraphed by him going as long as he did.
Yeah, I had that feeling. I know that it seems like the decision's either him or Jason Stevens, and the fact is Ray Kerr's got an option. He can go down. Jason Stevens does not. He would have to be DFA'd. Maybe they could get him through waivers. Maybe he would agree to take the assignment. But we've seen the Braves countless times try to keep all their options available, especially early in the season. So that's kind of what I was looking at. I think, if you go on pure performance and talent, I think Ray Kerr probably deserves to stay up. But, sometimes when you have options, it works against you. And it did feel like when he came back out for that third inning, I thought, well, I think this decision's probably been made. I know there's an off day, and you've got a lot of other guys that need to pitch, and you could probably bridge him if you really wanted to. But I kind of thought it was probably going to be Kerr anyway. That was going to be the guy when Pierce Johnson was ready.
My last note on tonight's game, aside from just the fact that it was kind of over before it even started, the fifth run that the Cubs scored on the bunt that made it basically to the outfield grass that was an amazing play. I just wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, that was crazy. I had to watch that again. But how fast is Pete Crow Armstrong? I mean, I knew he was fast.
He can fly, and it just was one of those it was perfectly placed. But it also was like zooming off the bat in a way that bunts don't often. I mean, I don't know if it made the grass, but it was close. Did the
shortstop field that on the?
I think it might have
on the. Was that Arcia fielding that on the second?
I believe that's side? Right. Just because there was nobody there.
That was a crazy play. You don't see that very often.
If that had mattered in the game more, it would have been focused on more. But it was because it wasn't already over at that point in time. But it was one of those like footnote things. But it was one of those weird situations you don't often see, like you mentioned. We have a couple more injury updates to get to. We mentioned Riley. We mentioned Pierce Johnson. Sean Murphy, it seems like all indications are he'll be on a rehab assignment sometime next week. I think people almost forgot about Sean Murphy. Not everybody, but it's like he's been gone for so long and he didn't really factor because it was the first game of the season. But he's very, very good. Like he's a star level player. And I know he's a well-rounded guy. He's not like this huge slugger. But Sean Murphy has been an above-average hitter in 4 straight seasons, including some star-level performance. So his bat has been sorely missed, and really all of it has been sorely missed. So that doesn't mean he's going to be back next week, but the fact that he is getting closer is encouraging because, with all respect to Chadwick Trump, the gap there is quite massive.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, the Braves got a great catching situation, and that includes Trump. I know he hasn't done a ton at the plate, but he handles the pitching staff real well. And when Chris Sale comes out and talks about how he likes working with him, I mean that's a huge endorsement. But yeah, you're right. I mean, getting Sean Murphy, that's an all-star level talent. And that's been a bat that's been missing since opening day. I mean, it's just going to make them better. You got to credit Trevor d'Arnaud because I think his performance has led a lot of people to forget a little bit about Sean Murphy. I mean, he's played really well too, has done a good job throwing out runners, which is not something that we really have seen a lot of in the past. And but yeah, I mean, good to hear that Murphy's getting close. Like I said, I think he told David O'Brien tonight that he didn't think he was going to need a lengthy rehab stint, but we'll just have to see how that goes. But maybe he's back in a week or so, and that's good news.
It'd be very, very good news. I do think, just again, not that people are ignoring it entirely, and he's not going to change the offense by himself. But I think for most teams in baseball, if they were underperforming offensively and they had a star-level guy like Sean Murphy out of the lineup, people would kind of attribute that more to his absence. And it's not only because of him. They're guys playing below their level so far this year, especially Ronald and Matt Olson, et cetera. But it's been, I think, noteworthy, and I think we've kind of almost memory holded a little bit in the last couple of weeks because he's just been gone for so long. But hopefully that's going to change in the near future. And, there's always roster stuff. I know you are extremely diligent about tracking the 40-man and doing all of the things. It's actually very helpful to me that you still do. I can go check that your 40-man numbers and what's going on there. But there's always process stuff that we don't always have time to dive into super deeply. But all these little machinations happen to matter. And when you do a podcast 4 times a week, it is helpful to know what's going on.
Yeah, well, I'm glad somebody checks that stuff out.
It might be me.
It's on the site and you can go find it anytime you need it. But, at the same time, it helps me. And by keeping track of that stuff, I kind of keep it in my mind a whole lot easier than I would if I didn't have it on the site. So, yeah. But yeah, it's fun. And I mean, I was looking tonight, I had to look it up tonight to make sure that Trump had an option, so they can send him back to Gwinnett too. And I mean, you keep that's a really good I know we've talked about it a lot, but that's a really good catching situation, and not just at the major league level, but to have a guy like Trump that you can stash at AAA. I mean, that's a plus. That I mean, you look at the Giants right now; their catching's a mess, and they're having to sign people, and we saw it in 2021 when the Braves went through what 6 or 7 catchers, before getting Travis back on that run to the World Series.
Yeah, and Trump, like he can't really hit, and that's okay. Most backup catchers can't hit, and that is the role he will play until Murphy is back, and that's all fine. But you're right; it's a small thing to just have a guy that they trust to go out and do his job, which is just to play defense and not mess up, basically. And there's some value, there's some inherent value in that, and a guy that everybody seems to like around the club. There's this before we get out of here. There's this strange series coming up. So the Braves are off on Thursday, as we've alluded to multiple times on this show. Then they have a 4-game series. Usually, you don't have a 4-game series if you're off on Thursday, because that means you would have 4 games in 3 days. But they have this wraparound series this weekend. It's 4 games in 4 days, but it's Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. And Monday afternoon is the game that is the odd one on the schedule. The Braves have their normal starters lined up for the series: Fried on Friday, Elder on Saturday, Lopez on Sunday, and Sale on Monday. They're playing the Padres at home. The Padres are fine. They're not an incredible baseball team, but I mean, other than just the interesting nature of the schedule, anything jumping out to you with regard to the series? Because again, the Padres are they're a 500-ish team so far. They've lost 3 games in a row. They're fine.
It's weird because it feels like about 10 days ago I looked at the Padres and they were like, I thought, man, they're trying to stay in this, and then they get swept by the Rockies, and
yeah,
I don't know what to
Rockies.
expect coming into this weekend, but yeah, this is a weird series. I sent everybody a message early this week to warn them that this was a wraparound series that you don't see very often, and it's crazy because you got another night game Sunday, and then you get the 12:20 start on Monday. I mean, I will not know what day it is by the time we get to Monday because it's going to be. I guarantee you, I'm going to write. So like it's Sunday at some point.
I need to go through and look across baseball how often the Sunday night baseball game is followed up by a Monday afternoon game between the same 2 teams. Like
it can't happen. It can't happen very often. I mean, because you just don't see
schedule wise. I mean, these wraparounds are already strange, and in general, to have a series end on Monday is already bizarre. But it's even weirder when you throw in the fact that it's the only standalone game Sunday night, and it's a quick turnaround. So you have a night game before a 12:20 start on Monday.
Yeah, and there's 2 national TV broadcasts in that series too,
and it was scheduled this way. It's not a makeup game. We should say that. It's not a rain makeup situation. Like this was a previously scheduled normal scheduled game. It's just bizarre.
And I believe there's one more later in the year, but I don't think I think there's actually I don't think that's an ESPN game on Sunday. I think it's actually ends with 2 day games, but. Don't quote me on that.
Now I'm trying to find it as we're talking because that's.
I think it's when the Dodgers come back in. I think that's a 4-game series. It's a wraparound.
You are absolutely right, but it's actually in September. In that instance, you have a Sunday afternoon game and a Monday night game.
Oh,
okay. So it's like a mini off day at home. That's bizarre.
Yeah,
that's also strange, and I'm sure we'll talk about this then when it happens in 4 months. But that's anyway. Obviously, what matters is what happens on the field. But as you and I we've done this for long enough. It's just an interesting quirk. But yeah, you mentioned it, but 2 national TV games, both in the evenings. These first 3 games are all 7:20, 7:15, and then 7 on Sunday before the getaway game for all parties on Monday, because the Braves then go to Chicago after that. But I mean, did the Padres release their probables? I know the Braves have. The Padres only had, I think, 2 of them coming into today, and maybe they still have. Yeah, they still have 2 of them now. So the one game on paper, this is going to sound familiar because it was the same situation that happened in LA, but the game on paper, that's the fear one, is Saturday night, Yu Darvish and Bryce Elder. Tough spot for the Braves there.
And I mean, and I mean, how often is that the game that messes everybody up? You've got all your studs going in the other 3 games, and often a lot of times that pitcher there is the one that steps up. But I thought Elder pitched pretty good the other night.
He did.
Obviously that was bad, a bad outing in Los Angeles. But I mean, for him, it kind of comes back to that walk column. I mean,
Sure does.
if he walks 3, 4, 5 guys, I mean, he's not going to be good. And it's just simple. And I mean, he's got 2 starts this year, I think, where he didn't walk a batter. I think it was the first one in Miami, and then his last one the other night. And he's going to keep them in the game that way. So, that's what you got to kind of focus on with him. I mean, if he's hitting his spots, he's tough, and if he's not, then he's not only walking guys, but he's leaving balls up and out over the plate, and those tend to get hit hard when you don't have overpowering stuff. The way he does. So, I mean, it'll be interesting to see. Darvish has been amazing too.
He's
For
very
some
good.
reason, I think the Braves have handled him in the past. I may be in trouble by saying that. I should have looked that up before we talked about it, but
That's all right.
I feel like there's been a start or two in there where Darvish struggled against Atlanta, but I mean, I don't know what they're going to do the last 2 games of that series. They were not announced, so it'll be
Still
interesting to see.
not
These
out. Yeah.
Padres are an interesting team. I mean, they traded Juan Soto. They got off to a really good start. They've still got a positive run differential, although it's just +4. I think it's inexcusable to get swept by the Rockies. I don't even know how that.
I
could
will
happen.
say, in defense of the Rockies, I know this is our guy Stevens pointed this out. The Rockies have now won, I believe it's 7 games in a
7
row,
in a
which
row.
is
7 in a row.
bizarre. That's
Yeah,
just
and then what it reminded me of was last year when the Braves had won all those games in a row and then went to Oakland and lost 2 out of 3.
yep. And it
But
was
I
like, whoa.
believe, yeah, but I think and that was what was deceiving about that was I think the A's had won. There was a 7 or 8 game winning streak in that, and nobody remembers that the Athletics won
It's just
7 or 8
baseball. I
games.
mean, that's
Yeah,
the most can't predict baseball thing in the world is the Rockies winning 7 games in a row. It's just
yeah,
that's
yeah,
the
no
nature of the
doubt.
beast and baseball. By the way, you were right about Darvish. I went and found that his career ERA against the Braves in 7 starts is 5.30.
For some reason, I think there was a start in there where he didn't get out of the first inning. But I don't, like I said, I can't remember that. But it seems like I remember
you're 1 for 1 so far on Darvish's
Okay.
career numbers. So
Yeah.
there you go. So obviously he's very good, and that goes without saying. He's a 5-time All-Star, as I'm looking at his baseball reference page right now, and even this year, ERA of 2.4. So that's a mismatch on paper, but we'll see if that comes to fruition, and we'll see who they end up throwing on Sunday and Monday. But it's a talented team. The Padres, of course, last year were disappointing and weird. They had this incredibly strong run differential, and they were still 500 because they just couldn't win a close game all year long. This year, they're around the same thing, and they're kind of just like hovering around 500 despite better numbers than that. They're more talented than that, and hopefully they don't just kind of just turn it on over the next 4 games in Atlanta. But a nice home off day. I was listening to the radio broadcast tonight, and I know that they were pointing this out, like how valuable players and managers and coaches see a home off day as over the course of a season. I know it's still early, it's May, but it's always nice for guys to be able to clear the head. I think Austin Riley has his golf tournament on Thursday, if I read that correctly somewhere today. So it's an off day with no travel, and everybody loves those.
Yeah, hopefully Austin's sitting that out now.
Yeah, I can't imagine he's playing. But
yeah, I can't imagine he's playing. But it seems like the Braves have had a ton of off days here lately too, and they're going to pay for that. And I think they've got a lengthy stretch coming up, and that's going to test a lot of things. But on the flip side of that too, I think sometimes getting out there and playing and not having too many off days, where your routine gets interrupted. Can be valuable too, and maybe for a struggling offense like that, getting this off day and then maybe getting a long stretch of games can help you get started and to kind of get it some momentum. So we'll just have to see how they finish out this homestand, and then, like I said, go to Wrigley Field.
yeah, and just to look ahead one more time briefly, they have no off days next week. In fact, they don't have an off day after tomorrow until this is a long time. They don't have an off day. I'm still scrolling. They don't have an off day until June 3rd, I think,
Wow.
after tomorrow.
Yeah.
So
They're
it's
gonna
like
pay.
it's like 2.5
Yeah.
weeks without a day off. So
Yeah, they're going to pay. They're going to pay for all those off days. That Boston series is always weird because it's sandwiched around 2 off days, and then another off day here on the homestand. So yeah, you knew that there's a stretch coming up that and that's going to test. I mean, when you look at this rotation, they've done a good job getting Reynaldo Lopez extra rest, Chris Sale some extra rest, but they're fixing to be in a stretch here. They're going to have to run some guys out there unless they call somebody up or a spot start or whatever.
we will see. Well, Kris, thank you for giving me all this time deep into the evening on a Wednesday. I know we plugged it earlier, but please tell folks where they can find all of your great work on battery power and social media and all those things.
You can find me on Twitter at Kris_Willis, batterypower.com. A lot of people were confused when the podcast left. They thought the site was shutting down. We're still kicking. I do want to tell you, I am really, really happy for you guys that you found a home with Foul Territory. I'm so excited about it. It's so good to have y'all back on the airways podcasting, because that was a couple of weeks there where we didn't have it, and I really missed it. You know how much respect I have for all you guys. So I'm really excited to see what you do here with Hammer Territory.
Well, thank you for that, my friend. I miss talking to you, but as we were joking offline, like, you're not really a guest. It's like I'm going to bug you every once in a while. I'm not going to make you do a show every week, because that would be too much. But we appreciate the opportunity in the first place, and also thank you for coming on to be here with me today, filling in for our guy Scott, who I believe, I'm not sure if he's even, Scott's out of the country for like 2 weeks, so
yeah,
we're gonna we got fill-ins going on. I'm looking at the schedule. Fortunately, there's no late night games for you, because Scott is the ace in the hole for batterypower.com for late night games. So
yeah, and I mean, we're not even going to hold that last West Coast trip against him, because
it was his fault, I have to say.
He does yeoman's work, and it keeps things going, and it's such a blessing to have him for those late night games.
It's nice to have a guy on the West Coast for sure. But anyway, thank you, Kris, for being here, and please, folks should be reading batterypower.com, also watching Battery Power TV with Kris and Grant McCauley. That's a fun watch every time as well. Please subscribe to this show, as I mentioned earlier, but we are found anywhere you get your podcasts: Apple, Spotify, Overcast, etc. We are part of Foul Territory, so check out the entire network of shows over there. Please tell a friend about the podcast as well. Leave 5-star ratings and reviews, and I begged and pleaded today on Twitter, but if you missed it, the best thing you can do besides subscribing is to find someone in your life that likes the Braves and might be interested in listening to this podcast, and just put this podcast in front of them. Send them a link or a Facebook post or whatever, and we really appreciate all the support to grow the podcast. One more time, thanks to Kris for being here. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you all next time.